and making and considering architecture, if you like, as something that is ecological. In that we believe architecture, the city, and nature are all interconnected. They are, if you like, our ecology. And as Aristotle knows, the flourishing of any one thing is dependent on the flourishing of everything else, and one cannot selfishly have a good life, or, if you like, one cannot selfishly be a good architect. Instead, a virtuous thing, or a beautiful thing, would naturally benefit both itself and others, human and non-human, at the same time. And we believe that architecture should flourish as part of a flourishing world and not at its expense. So I'm going to go in some sort of strategies or practical examples of how we're trying to do this through, mainly through two projects in London, specifically South London. So one project sits here, that's the Bricklayers Arms roundabout in Southwark, and then the other project sits here, which is just adjacent to London Bridge train station, just on the northern edge of the viaducts that kind of head southeast from London Bridge. In both instances, we're talking about projects in bits of city brutally disrupted by technological advancements in the form of motorways, roundabouts, and in this case, train lines. So the impact of technology on London, I guess on any pre-modern city for that matter, is an ongoing interest of ours. And in the lecture, Cautious Prometheus, A Few Steps Towards a Philosophy of Design, Bruno Latour sort of considers, if you like, the impact of technology on society. And he, through this talk, reconsiders the myth of Prometheus, often portrayed as a heroic figure who brings fire from the gods to humanity, as a cautionary tale about the unintended consequences of technical innovation. He suggests that rather than blindly embracing technological progress, we should approach it critically. Latour emphasises the significance of designs and, if you like, architects' ability to shape our world, and he argues it's not just about aesthetics or functionality, that it has a design architecture, if you like, has a poetic capacity and can play a crucial role in defining relationships, power dynamics, and the way we interact with the environment and the natural world. And he sets out an approach that considers the broader social, ethical, and philosophical implications of our actions in relation to our current crisis. I think this was written in about 2008, but he's talking about the climate emergency as our current crisis. And he points out that a new revolutionary energy will be taken from a set of attitudes that are hard to come by in revolutionary moments. He lists them as modesty, care, precaution, skill, craft, meaning, attention to detail, careful conservation, and design as redesign. He says we must be radically careful or carefully radical, and notes that we're living in a very odd time. So Pebble Gardens on Bricklayers Arms, roundabouts, roundabout. So this project started as a competition entry in response to a brief that was looking to expand the public realm around Tower Bridge Road. There were several sites that teams invited to the competition could choose from, and we chose this site, which is the podium garden that belongs to Pebble Gardens, which is the name of the housing estate that it is still a part of. So just to give some context, so this is London in 1690, and this is where the site is. So we were right on the edge of the 1690 city, if you like, where the city met agricultural land. That dot is over a pub on a street called Kent Street, now known as the Old Kent Road, which is a pilgrimage route, effectively connecting London to Canterbury Cathedral. And Australia, you would have had Chaucer and his tales heading up and down Kent Street. Fast forward 300 years, I think, and roughly, I think, with this map, and London is now the biggest city in the world, building itself furiously, and the Old Kent Road is one of the capital's main arteries. London needs materials to build itself, and that is mainly in the form of bricks. Kent has transport links, both the Old Kent Road, but also, importantly, the Thames, and it has a lot of clay in the ground. So within Southwark, you find an entire industry connected to bricklaying and the manufacturing of bricks going on in Kent and their importation into London. And so the pub that met the Fields is now a quite large coaching inn called the Bricklayers Arms. This is all sort of relevant because I think what it highlights is the relationship between geology, topography, environment, and the characteristics, qualities, even the economy, culture, and ecology of places. They are all interconnected. So this was the pub in 1963. Pebble House, you can now see sort of highlighted in red, or that is specifically the Palladian Garden, but the estate appears in the 1960s, just along from the pub. There it is. And then whilst the Pebble survives this, but sadly the pub doesn't. So the pub survived the war, but it didn't survive the technological advancements of the 1960s. And in 1960-something, permission is granted to demolish it along with huge swaths of the surrounding area in order to form the A2 flyover and the roundabouts required for it. The photos of the flyover, I think, taken around that time. These would have been taken from the roof of Pebble Gardens, and the Podium Garden that became our project would be just out of picture somewhere in the sort of bottom right of the image. So this drawing illustrates how the Podium Garden went from being a part of the street grain of the city to something disconnected and kind of quite isolated from the grain of the city as a result of the construction of the roundabout. So with this history in mind, and knowing that Southwark Council wants to expand the public realm, and knowing that a public place and an important gathering spot had been lost from this edge, we started thinking about how this humble structure could start to become recognisable as part of the public realm. We knew some moves were required. Right from very early stages, we knew that we would have to make a big stair that had presence on the street and connected the garden to the street and the street to the garden. And we knew that this garden would have to be sort of quite unique, quite extraordinary to sort of draw people in. We also knew that we wanted to open up the ground beneath this structure, and that there was an opportunity to make a public room within it that could be a part of the public life of the city. What existed on the ground was 12 garages that we just used for locking up goods, mainly. Like the people were no longer even parking in them. These are just some of the pictures of the model that we made at the competition stage, trying to communicate these ideas and the potential transformation of this structure. And yeah, as well as modelling the podium as an object, if you like, or thinking about the kind of the moves within the structure of the podium, we're also drawing it as part of the city, and then starting to imagine its role in further expanding the public realm of the city, promoting the idea to Southwark Council that they might consider eventually making this roundabout three-sided in the way that the Elephant and Castle roundabout down the road had become, or has very recently become, three-sided, just improving pedestrian life in and around it. So the kind of, this particular section is going to look at the regenerative potential of removal and repair. So when we were looking at that podium, we knew that we had to cut some holes in it effectively. And we were immediately reminded of Gordon Matta Clark's work, an artist Carlson I'm both sort of familiar with and interested in. And he demonstrates the potential of careful and constructive demolition in this, specifically I think in his work Conical Intersect, that just felt so relevant. Cuts, quite a brutal level of removal, if done with care, can open amazing possibilities in existing structures and become a very positive act. So this became a project about cutting through holes, trying to cut and to make the most of a very limited budget. So one hole, maybe I'll stand up, is here that enabled a tree to be planted in the ground and grow up through the structure, providing a canopy to the garden above, and providing importantly kind of shade to the garden above. Another hole that brought natural light down into the deep floor plan of the kind of public events room in the middle of this plan, and then the third hole that enabled the stair to come up from the pavement of the city. And then around the public event space, we're kind of working with the grain of the garages to provide a series of studio spaces. This has now become a cafe and bookshop. And then there's a garage that was dedicated to making bin storage for the town. So 3 holes. And as I was saying, there's kind of careful consideration around each one of these. We wanted to make sure that we didn't damage the integrity of the in-situ concrete structure. We had to make sure that when we went down into the ground, we didn't hit anything that would cost us money. And would limit the ability for us to plant a tree, quite a tall tree, in the ground. Similarly, the hole for the staircase was kind of quite carefully coordinated back to the grain of the garages. So on the ground floor, careful constructive demolition transformed what were parking garages into this public event space, and which is surrounded by not-for-profit artist studios. So Southwark, I mean, it was quite an unusual process in that Southwark had a design competition. We won it. We started developing designs for the project with Southwark before they had any operators in mind, so there kind of wasn't, there was no intention for them to ever actually manage this building. They were going to go out to tender for an operator, but we were able to kind of take the design to a certain point before they did that. We were then incredibly lucky that a not-for-profit arts organisation called Former took the building on, and part of their role is to carry out a series of public events in this hall at the centre of the plan, and also keep the garden open, and then some of their rent goes into the maintenance budget for the garden. And that kind of economy, is incredibly important when proposing things like large green spaces, because often the hesitation around them for clients is based on maintenance costs involved in it. So we were very lucky with Former, and this is an example of a talk that posting in the public gallery. And they use, especially throughout the spring and summer, they use the ground floor event space and the garden together, and it's quite a unique kind of space for to have a garden connected to this site of this type. Okay. So now I'm going to move on to looking at sort of making architecture with the principles of circular economy. So I think we probably all are familiar with what the idea of circular economy and the stats in relation to the built environment speak for themselves, and architects can't shy away from this. So we try to follow these basic principles in our work. Design out waste, design for adaptability, design for reuse, and design for longevity. So about 800 metres or so away from Peveril to the northeast, we were told about another architectural competition, again Southwark, same client actually, Southwark Council's Place and Wellbeing team, the amazing team within the council that are allowed to spend up to a certain amount on kind of ground up projects. And so they're always looking at these disused sites within the city and hosting little competitions to sort of brainstorm ideas for what could happen on these sites. And this competition was asking for a proposal for Hollywood Street, as well as a small wedge-shaped site just adjacent to it. So it's this little kind of wedge in there, just off the street. And actually, like Peveril, this was classed as a meanwhile site. So Southwark Council have a huge, vast estate. There's an awful lot of bombs dropped on South London, and it's a huge rebuild effort post-war, and lots of that's remained in the ownership of council, which is amazing. It means they've got a big estates team and they've got quite a big development team, and they've got this place and wellbeing team looking at these small sites and often looking at these meanwhile sites. But I think what's really amazing about Southwark's place and wellbeing team is they class meanwhile as 15 years. So they're looking for small projects on these sites that can have a social and cultural impact, but they give the operators of those sites 15 years to establish themselves in the community. Often they come from the community already. They are local, kind of socially orientated enterprises, but they're given 15 years, which is quite significant because it takes time to establish things within a context like this. So we were asked to build on a strategy document that had been prepared for this street, which is a key gateway to the low line. So just to explain what the low line is. The low line is an attempt by Southwark and a group that's sort of led by both members of Southwark Council, but also by local landscape architects and kind of urban thinkers, that is trying to heal the wounds, if you like, of the Victorian railway viaduct, and also take advantage of its unique kind of qualities. It's a brutal thing to take a railway viaduct through a bit of city in the way that it was taken through, but it's also quite an amazing and monumental thing. And they want to heal the wounds by effectively greening and pedestrianising as much of the spaces in and around the viaduct as they possibly can. And it's kind of grassroots sort of development. So Southwark's Place and Wellbeing team putting small pots of money to making stuff happen. Almost an inverse of the High Line, if you like, which was the big project in New York, much more top down, one big hit kind of deliver it. This will happen over a 20, 30-year period. But there is a strategy for it, and our project, which is effectively here, was considered by Southwark a key gateway for all of the traffic coming out of London Bridge Station, which, as you can imagine, is vast. And again, these are the sorts of spaces in and around the low line that they're looking to establish more public life and to pedestrianise, but also importantly to kind of green, which is harder said than done. And there are little examples of places that now have quite a lot of public life, and they vary in scales. So the further sort of southeast you go, the space between the existing sort of neighbouring buildings and the viaduct gets greater. Anyway, our proposal was to work with a sort of socially orientated cafe based in Southwark to propose a kind of small kiosk on the site that celebrated some of the food culture that had started to sort of embed itself in the arches. So the arches are used for all sorts of different things, but they are increasingly being used for sort of small independent food businesses. There's a lot of microbreweries establishing themselves in the arches, coffee roasters, bakers, etc., etc. And yeah, we wanted to place a kind of kiosk on the ground. The idea was that sort of celebrated that local industry, but also use a blank facade to the back of Southwark Council offices. So these are actually owned by Southwark and where a lot of Southwark Council work. And this was a big blank facade. And to use that blank facade to create a sign for the street that could be seen from the platforms of London Bridge Station. And it's worth actually, so you can see that these are the train station platforms which look straight across our site. And the other thing we wanted to do was, this and I'll talk about this, is an amazing little landscaping project that was commissioned by Southwark Council, I think probably 10 or so years before our project, and it was doing incredibly well, but was almost unseen and kind of known apart from people in Southwark Council that would come out and have their lunches in here or sit in there to have a cigarette or whatever. And we wanted to bring this this bit of greening of the city out into the street and basically kind of start the process of marching it southeast down the low line. So that's this is one of the competition sketches. So we were proposing the idea that we use the blank facade to make a sign for the street, and that we would make a kiosk that effectively acted as a sort of giant planter. Gibbons Rent, as we'll look at, was using precast concrete drainage rings to create planters, and we wanted to bring that out into this bit of public realm and then take it up onto our building, effectively the idea of it up onto our building and carry it up through this sort of armature towards a sign. So this is the plan, and one of the things we were having to do here was effectively make a back condition, a kind of a back of house condition. These streets were used. Holyrood Street was actually used. The arches on Holyrood Street were used for the logistics of the refurbishment of London Bridge Station. So the street had been closed for about a decade whilst they refurbished the station, and the arches are full of things just like light bulbs and bits of conduit and stuff and it was constant flow of builders' vehicles up and down the street. The station refurbishment is now complete and the builders are moving out, but it has this very kind of back of house feel, And so this project is the first step in making that sort of back of house type street feel a little bit more like a public place, like it give it a bit more of a kind of front of house quality. So the kiosk is working quite hard in that we had to look after things like all of the bins. These are the bins for both the offices, the kiosk, but also future bins in case we can establish a market along the street, which is an idea proposed and sort of still being considered. This is a big utilities cupboard. Again, that's for power and water, both for the kiosk but also for future street activities. And then providing an accessible WC. This is Gibbons Rent coming along the side, and so you can see how Gibbons Rent literally kind of comes along and then kind of becomes our project. And this is the quality of Gibbons Rent. So it's really amazing, and it's well planted and it's well maintained, and there are lots of examples of vines and stuff going really high up these buildings. So it encouraged us to think quite big and bold with the kind of greening that we could achieve. Okay, so in the section of the building you can see the precast concrete planters that have been brought out onto the street that are acting as planters. They're also acting as ballast to lampposts that provide light when this is operating in the evenings. So the lampposts don't need any foundations because they're ballasted by the planters. We then stacked a series of these concrete drainage channels to create a kind of grand columns that make the threshold to the kiosk, but also importantly hold up the kind of roof structure that's taking the load of all of these planters above. And then you've got the kiosk to the right, and then right at the back the storage unit for the bins, etc. And you can see that there's this sort of fine steel mesh kind of canopy that hangs down from the sign on top of this building and connects to the lampposts, and that is sort of, I think this summer we'll start to see it really kind of green. I mean, it's already doing quite well, but it is starting to now kind of hold all of these vines and green. So in terms of building with the principles of circular economy, we worked really hard. I mean, there's obviously the reusing the existing concrete planters to make footings and foundations effectively to things like lampposts, but also setting out our structure to the standard dimensions of sheets. So there was very little wastage in the lining of this kiosk because it was all set out to sheet dimensions. That also brings the build cost down. The timber frame was using standard sort of section sizes that were bolted together in a way that made it very easy to unbolt them and take them apart. And importantly, there was no penetrations in the ground, no concrete was cast in the ground. So this is the kiosk under construction. So you can see kind of pretty standard timber sections, all bolted together. And we kind of enjoyed the sort of celebrating these connections, and we tend to draw our projects quite intensely. We kind of want to control almost every component and how it's set out, and in this project even going as far as the washers to each of these bits sort of became kind of ornament within the project. I mean, this is actually it's like mad because it's a room for storing the bins, but even in the room for storing the bins, there's a kind of care that went into each one of those bolts. And yeah, actually, I mean, we find find that we have the site carpenters, and they're often incredibly practiced and skilled, and you sort of think they would tend to fuck off, but they don't. They kind of enjoy this kind of level of attention to detail. So the combination here, and I think another. Okay, no, actually, we're doing the principles of circular economy, but a combination of this filigree timber structure and these sort of heavy but recyclable kind of columns, creates a kind of enigmatic structure. This is part shed, it's part kind of loggia in a kind of grand sense, right? It's part planter, it's part sign, but it treads very lightly. We wanted it to have both sorts of grace and gravitas at the same time. Back to Peveril now, and the principles of circular economy are also important in the designing of Peveril. So I mean, not only the fact that we were reusing and extending the life of an existing structure, but we tried to go further. I mean, as I was saying earlier, we actually really kind of worked with the client and the operator once they were on board to agree that the ideal studio sizes would have to adapt to the grain of the building, if you like, to really minimise demolition, to maximise what we could get out of the budget. So working with the rhythm working with the structural grain of the garages, and we were literally able to leave in place in most instances. Just the brick walls that separated those garages became the studio walls. In a couple of instances, we removed walls to make bigger studios. But they wouldn't have been the ideal studio dimensions on a brief for an artist's studio building. But by the client being flexible in that sense, we were able to do a lot more with less. We also, all of the garage doors were kept and then reused in the making of new doors. So these white doors have just kind of become the red doors. So none of the material was kind of skipped without thought. And a lot of the actually, I'd say there was quite a lot of work to make sure that the garden's drainage strategy worked with the existing drainage routes to avoid groundworks. Again, it was trying to make the budget work really hard. And where we did make window openings and remove bricks, most of those bricks went back in to the new structure. So the sort of minimal material was leaving the site. So both these projects create a vast, what's called sort of biodiversity net gain. So I don't know how familiar BNG is with everybody, but it's becoming more and more important for architects, because as of April, it's actually going to become a planning requirement for all major and minor developments. So this is an increase in any development will have to have an increase in the quality or amount of natural habitat after the development. But both these projects, we were way beyond 10%. I think we're up like 50-60% in terms of the net gain of biodiversity on the site. Building as part of a wider ecology is not just about getting kind of biodiversity net gain on your site. It's also about the materials that you're specifying, the methods you're building with, and ensuring that those things don't have a negative impact on the environment. But looking at how we did achieve net gain specifically on Peveril, I think is kind of interesting. So Peveril was the first of now many collaborations with an amazing horticulturalist called Nigel Dunnett, and he's the professor of planting, design and urban horticulture at Sheffield University at the Department of Landscape Architecture at Sheffield. And Nigel's research interests for a long, long time have been effectively ecological and horticultural sort of mixes that achieve very low input, high impact ecologies in urban environments. The image on the left was an early conceptual collage that we made of what we wanted to sort of achieve in terms of the garden. We wanted it to be really green, really lush, really kind of amazing as a planted space. And on the right is an example of some of Nigel's planting at the Barbican in London, where he's planted up the Napoleon Gardens throughout the Barbican. So he was a really kind of important collaborator on this. But one of the things we had to understand was what the existing concrete slab could actually take, what condition it was in, because this was built in the 1960s, and how much load, if it was in good condition, how much load could it actually take. So there was a process of, quite early on, of cutting, of scraping back a series of scraping back all of the layers until we got to the concrete slab, and then cutting out the concrete slab to understand its structural capacity. And it was amazing how many layers had been built up on this roof over time. Once we got to the concrete slab, we realised it was very thin and had very, very fine rebar in it, effectively not particularly strong slab. But the good news is that we realised that there was an awful lot of dead load on the slab that could be removed. So all of those layers could be removed, replaced by much lighter waterproofing that would free up kind of structural capacity for planting medium and plants and water that is obviously needs to be retained up there for these plants to flourish. It had its limitations though, the structure had its limitations, so the strategy was that we worked on with Nigel and Price and Myers, structural engineers on this, was to create a topography that effectively created depth, planting depth, where the structure could take it. So where we had columns, we ramped up the soil and created really deep beds for bigger mature plants, or for increased density of planting. And where we couldn't, where the structure maybe couldn't take it, we ramped the topography back down. Which was amazing, because it also created a landscape that was so different from the streetscape, if you like. So I think the garden has a particularly magical quality when you get up there, because you go from a kind of the flat, hard kind of pavement up onto something that is gravelly. The idea of the landscape is that even the harder surfaces are sort of semi-permeable and will start to seed over time. So the whole thing can kind of green, other than the sort of desired paths that people move through that will remain kind of paving. But yeah, it's also topographic, so it kind of undulates, and that's distinctive to the street. Back to Hollywood Street, where the strategy was very different. We'd been to Gibbons Road, we'd seen how well it was working, and we were very confident that if we kind of took this strategy out of Gibbons Rent and onto the street, we could over time green our proposal and continue to kind of green the street with this level of intensity. This does require maintenance, and it importantly requires kind of watering, but as long as you have kind of over half a metre of growing medium within those planters, you can grow really amazing things. And this is now starting to kind of play out along the street, which is great. And hopefully, over the next decade or so, we'll see strategies like this being implemented further southeast down towards Southern Park. As I was saying, it's not just about bringing biodiversity into the city and onto buildings, but it is also about the materials that you are using and knowing that they're not having a negative impact on our ecology. And so we are now really focused on using bio-based materials and using structural solutions that have very low embodied carbon. So this on the left is a community centre in North East London, and you can see it's using kind of micropile foundations that are reusable. It's a timber frame. It's clad in timber wood fibre insulation. It has corrugated hemp sheet cladding around the perimeter walls, and then a zinc roof, which is kind of reusable. You know. On the right is actually a private house that we're about to complete, and that's built entirely out of timber, hemp, wood fibre, and wood, kind of external wood cladding. Very, very low embodied carbon. We work now with structural engineers that model the embodied carbon as part of the early stages of working out structural strategies. And you know, it's really amazing the kind of carbon savings that you can create as a result of this. I think it was only the other week, I think, an article came out talking about the ability for architects and engineers to make 200 times more impact on the environment through thoughtful design than they are able to through any kind of lifestyle change. Obviously, we should all make those lifestyle changes as well, but I think we should be aware of the power and the responsibility that we have as architects. I think it's also important to say that for us, this approach isn't an add-on. In our minds, this is architecture. It's part of the practical art of building in a way that should be, and perhaps once was just without having to think too much about it, attuned to its environment. Eden in the title suggests a search for living harmoniously with nature and being ecological, but I think it also hints towards a place of pleasure and delight, if you like. And like Prometheus, this myth, as we all know, comes with a warning, and it's certainly the case that many technologies delivering comfort and delight are doing so at the expense of the planet. And we need to wean ourselves off, the forbidden fruit, if you like. And I think make the argument that this doesn't need to be at a cost premium. I think these projects are illustrating that. And it doesn't need to be at the expense of comfort and of delight. In fact, we believe that an ecological approach can create environments that are actually healthier, richer, and more meaningful through that connection to the territories in which they exist. As a practice, we're very interested in the atmosphere and the mood of situations and environments we're designing for. We're interested in the visual and the haptic qualities of all of the materials that we're using and the forms that we're working with. Natural light and shade are completely free and key ingredients, we think, when striving to make beautiful buildings or beautiful environments. I love there's a Heidegger line that an old tutor always used to kind of say, which is, only the lightness of light can reveal the stoniness of stone. That it's a very important aspect for us as we work through design ideas. How is this relating to the natural light conditions of the place? We are concerned with maybe more classical ideas of decorum. and our buildings' relationship with the places in which they sit, the occasions, the situations in which they host. We think as architects we should be able to design really amazing rooms, and we should be able to compose facades, and we should be able to organise space so that the act of moving through it is instinctive and pleasurable. This is quite a recent project we've completed for the ICA in London, and again we were very much, because of budgetary constraints mainly, but kind of ecological principles as well, using material that they already had. I mean, there were some new partitions required in here, but we were reusing a lot of existing materials that they had to make sense of their kind of entrance foyer, make sense of a new, more inclusive access to their gallery, to enclose their gallery so that they can put on a wider range of art pieces within it, looking to put more sound and visual work within their gallery. But trying to sort of solve these problems in a way that's delightful, I think, is kind of key role of the architect. So finally, sort of Carlos and I, we love this image, and we've often used this image when presenting our teaching studios, etc. The themes of our teaching studios. I think it was first introduced to us by Tom Emerson. The picture is based on a wood block. It's by Jeff Wall, and it's called A Sudden Gust of Wind after Hokusai. And it's based on a wood block title, a wood block print title with more or less the same name, created by Japanese artist Hokusai in the early 19th century. And the new print explores a lot of the themes that are playing out in the old print, illustrating that these themes are still relevant today. You know, the themes haven't gone away. Themes such as the interaction between man and nature, the transience of it all. It contemplates the interconnectedness of the past and the present. And I think it's a scene we can all relate to. As I was coming up thinking that the flying paper reminded me in some ways of walks. I don't know if Castle Leeds still exists, but like walks for us across the cow fields, you know, with models or drawings or whatever, and just the kind of the fact that, you know, we are the weather, we are at its mercy. And whilst a lot changes, a lot doesn't change. And then I'll finish it. Yeah, I'll finish it. But I think just capturing this idea of architecture as a kind of ecological endeavour. Thanks. That's it.
Architectural world that you constructed. It's amazing to see. Thank you so much. So there's opportunity for questions, comments, discussion. Anyone who want to do time-wise? You're bang on. So we've got a little bit of time left. You want to kick things off?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You said talking about circular economy. Does that extend to water use within things, or is the water going in that thing sewage and then moving to the filters?
It's a really good question, because it's important. I mean, in the case of both Peveril and Holyrood Street, water is drained back into the existing sewage systems. But we've got obviously intervening in like urban drainage at a large scale is complicated. But as projects are getting bigger, we've got a project at the moment it's an office for the Olympic Park maintenance teams and security teams in London, so I don't know if any of you attended the Olympics in 2012 or are familiar with the park in East London. It's a vast park, kind of almost equivalent in size to the Royal Parks in London. Anyway, we're working on a building with the LLDC for the park teams, and there we are working again with the principles of circular economy, because LLDC, that's the London Legacy Development Council or Corporation, and GLA, who are sort of put money into these LLDC projects, have hugely high ambitions for circular economy or for sort of target net zero. And there we are looking at the possibility of a zero run site. So a site where we like very little, if none of the water is going back into the drain system. It's circular.
Would that then be used within the building, or would it then be used for like plants or stuff like that?
A combination of both. Yeah. Certainly, all of the rainwater is collected and recycled. I think it will be mainly recycled for planting.
Just a quick question. One of your structures had a very high roof light. Is there a reason for that? Is that something because of the urban context, or is it just something?
Well, is it the roof like Peveril that goes down into the?
Yeah, it's a timber structure, I believe.
There's the roof. Oh, sorry. Is it in this project?
No, the one before.
The community hall.
This one, yes.
Yes.
What is the shape of the?
What's driving the shape of it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a building adjacent to an existing community centre in a garden that's quite set back from the street, and they want to have more of a presence on the street, but they also want the building to be a garden building, so they are quite lucky with the ground surrounding it. So the form is really
a statement.
Yeah, it's a way of them having presence really in the bit of city in which they exist. So it's quite a small building relative to the context. So it's trying to present itself because it's.
I thought it had to do something maybe with the daylight, just trying to.
I mean, it's true that we are top lighting the space. I mean, there are some views out, but we are using a high skylight to kind of top light the hall, so that they can light sort of naturally light events.
Thank you.
Really enjoyed the talk, thank you. You mentioned earlier in the presentation about how you work locally, personalise people who are clearly, as you are, heavily embedded in the process of trying to save the carbon, I just wondered how those relationships play out with the people on the site, the contractors, the operatives, those kind of things. Is there, in that culture of where the predominant culture, I guess, is still it's easy to put things into a skip, and it is, and it's an inconvenience to keep things and work with the unknown of existing materials and what. And I just wonder have you had to work around those as barriers to find solutions, or have they become? Are you working with a group of people who now know?
Yeah, no, it's a really good question.
The processes, because
I mean, these are both quite little projects, so they've been constructed by relatively small teams, and it's meant we can all be quite close to the process. This project we're working on, I was talking about the Park HQ for the Olympic Park. It's a big building, and it is already a concern. We're only at stage 2, 3A, we're about to go to planning. But it's already something that we are discussing with the clients because you do need buy-in, and it does impact the way that you might think about tendering the building. It's a really good question. You know, it's a concern, but as this approach scales up, hopefully, touch wood, we'd like to make bigger projects in the future. We're aware that that's going to be a challenge. Yeah,
Mm.
it's a challenge. And I think, the client is also part of the equation. You may well know, you've got the architects, the builders, and the client, and you all have to be singing from the same hymn sheet. But I think we found the cultures changing quite quickly. Certainly, we're working. I mean, we're lucky to have a couple of public sector clients that do really believe in this stuff, and they're willing to take the time needed to deliver exemplar buildings. I guess they're also aware that more and more of it's being implemented through the planning system, and if they're going to implement it through the planning system, they've got to do it themselves. They've got to be the leaders in doing it. But everybody's conscious of the sort of stage 4 handover
Yeah.
and the requirement to collaborate.
Yeah.
It's complicated. It's a really good question because it's a really complicated, I think, and difficult thing.
In the handover process, do you also include a deconstruction package of what materials can be recycled, what materials can't be recycled, what materials have what sort of warranty on them, what materials can be maybe reused in other projects? Do you have a sort of...
Yeah, so it's again a really good question in relation to designing and building with the principles of circular economy. So yes, we are. We now work in BIM as a studio, which is quite. I think more people are working in BIM, but we decided a couple of years ago that we wanted to embrace that technology. So we're not critical of all technology, but we realised know where to embrace it, and we've fully invested in building our buildings through BIM, which I think the world probably knows what BIM is, but effectively you end up at the end of stage 4 through stage 5 developing a digital twin. And that can act as a guide to both what's in the building and how it could possibly be deconstructed and reused. But yeah, part 7 and stage 7 and 6 and stage 7 are really important, and they're often overlooked by clients. They don't want to spend the fees to have the design team come and continue to investigate how the building's being used and whether how materials are performing and which materials might need to be replaced, and all of this stuff that can inform both how we design and specify long-lasting buildings, but also how we can better kind of recycle materials within buildings that have met the end of life. But again, NLDC, who we're working with at the moment, have encouraged the whole design team to really think about their stage 6 and stage 7 resourcing, and they are asking us to put those documents together. So it's it is happening. It does happen. But it needs, as we say, it needs buy-in from all parties.
Questions. Keep but I'll ask one for the moment. I mean, it's fascinating. Two of the projects working with Southwark Council, and it's intriguing because Southwark is this clearly very large local authority, but are immensely contradictory at the same time, because they're working on these, the projects that you showed, the role of the client in that is obviously critical to being able to do what you want to do. Mile and a half down the road, they're in the process of knocking down the Aylesbury estate, have quite a strong track record of knocking down estates, so there is this huge contradiction. I'm just wondering, how have you found working with Southwark? This clearly this multi-headed contradictory.
Well, it's a big organisation.
The team that you've been working with clearly have license.
No, I think they are a good team, and they feel the tensions that you're describing all the time, because they are on the ground. They're kind of one of the things they pride themselves on is knowing what's going on the ground. They do a lot of engagement, a lot of outreach, and all of these projects have to go through an enormous amount of kind of community engagement before being realised. And they constantly met with those kind of questions. You know, how can you're coming to talk to us about this? I want to talk about that huge piece of demolition or huge piece of change. And it's complicated. I mean, even on Hollywood Street. So because it is such a big estate, they've got PNB Paribas managing a lot of their real estate. You know, that's managed effectively by the private sector. And even on this site, we had to go and consult with kind of head of the state at PNB Paribas because it is a meanwhile site, and there is obviously a plan for this element of their estate. You know, we're not that far from the Shard. You know, we're right by London Bridge Station. There's huge value in the land there, so they own a lot of it. So, and he was immediately sort of saying to our direct contact, this amazing kind of plan of development officer, Ruby Bowes at Southwark Council. Wow, God, we could get a Starbucks. You know, and because just around the corner from here, they have developed a whole load of archways right by the station, and they've got big names in there. You know, they've got whatever. You know, I can't think off the top of my head, but a number of food and beverage businesses paying really good rent. So they're going, wow, this is great. Yeah, okay, we can get serious rent. And Ruby Bowes from Suffolk saying, no, that's not the idea. Like we're working with a socially orientated kind of cafe. They do training schemes for X, Y, Z. Like that's and we're going to give them very, very low rent for the next 5 years, and then we're going to increase it a little bit, and then we're going to increase it a little bit. But to get them established, otherwise the whole place just becomes sort of gentrified or flattened in the way that we know cities do when all they are is kind of commerce and consumption. So it's a tension. But the reason, a lot of the Section 106 money from work going on down the Old Kent Road is what goes into the Place and Wellbeing Team's pod. So they are literally spending.
That was going to be my question, is the money that pays for this. And it's not a lot. But that's Section 106.
Yeah. So I think there's conflict within the council all the time. And that's how cities evolve, right? I mean,
Yes.
When you're increasing biodiversity, how do you sort of think, which sort of biodiversity are we going to improve? Maybe you look at sort of insects, you can sort of look at aviaries, sort of water-based biodiversity. How do you is it very much side by side, or is it very much these are ones that are more important because there may be more decline, or they provide better social use, or for example, people aren't as scared of potentially birds than they are of spiders and bugs.
So we're lucky that we work in both of these projects. We were collaborating with horticulturalists. We weren't actually working with ecologists, but in some of the big projects we have in the office, we are collaborating with both horticulturalists and ecologists. So that becomes a piece of work, for them, and we are in dialogue often with in those projects, the bigger sites, and the ecological impact is kind of greater. You're also in dialogue with the ecologists within a council that know their ecology really well. So it is, it's discussed, but we are more often than not trusting the view of the horticulturists and ecologists that we're working with. I know Nigel, for example, a lot of his work is about plant mixes and species that thrive in urban conditions where they don't get much water, they don't perhaps get huge amounts of sunlight, and yet they still kind of thrive and flourish. And he's also, those plant mixes that attract a lot of birds and bees, and but I can't really go into any more detail than that. He would be able to what's driving his kind of designs, but it is planting with ecology in mind. They're very much like ecology driven in terms of what they're trying to do as horticulturists.
Hey, sorry, just following on from that question, and it may be, forgive me if it's not something that you can answer, if it's a question that would need to go to the ecologists. But there has been quite a lot of critique, if you like, of I think we'd all agree that, biodiversity net gain is a positive thing, and obviously you've gone far beyond the sort of minimum requirements with regards to the planning system and things. But there has been quite a lot of critique of the kind of standard methodology that's been proposed for calculating that biodiversity net gain, in terms of kind of how do you quantify biodiversity and how do you say that X amount of this type of habitat is worth X amount of that habitat. And I was just wondering, had you had any experience? What was your experience basically of that?
No, and there's offsetting, like with carbon, and that's going to. I think that's causing an interesting tension already in agricultural communities because they're part of it. Everyone in London is kind of saying, let's push it to Leicestershire or Norfolk or wherever, and we can go and plant some trees, and so it's not perfect and it's problematic, and I think it's really quite new as well, but that's kind of central policy, so it's going to be debated a lot. We have been, so far all of our projects have been able to achieve it. I mean, these projects actually weren't required to in terms of planning and time they're built, but we do have projects in the office that have been able to achieve it on site, working with horticulturists and ecologists that are informing what it is, and I guess we are to some extent taking their word that it is good quality and it will benefit the environment. But I'm aware of the pitfalls of it, and I think it's going to be debated a lot, I think.
It's just really obvious that these projects go beyond that, so I was just wondering what your experience has been.
Well, this project I've talked about already, this Park HQ, it sits within what once was a nature reserve. It lost its nature reserve status. It's a retrofit. I should have sort of shown some slides, but it's a very, very early stage. But it's the retrofit of a water pumping station that was built for the Olympic Park. Literally, it was in operation for about 2 years and then became redundant. And it just sits there, all this pumping kit within a big steel frame building. And because that's a Thames Water asset, it's got a big security fence all the way around this particular area of land. No one's been allowed to go in there. It gets checked on. There's been a couple of operatives from Thames Water in and out of that site over the last decade, not much else. So it's kind of wilded, and there's a mixture of amazing ecology and then there's an awful lot of invasive species sort of taking hold as well. But it's very, very green. I mean, if you look at the Google Earth image of it, you can just about make out the building, but it's an incredibly kind of green site. So achieving a net gain on a site like that is really complicated, and that is where we then get into the quality arguments. And so we'll know more about it. We're just literally entering at the moment, but we're working with an amazing ecologist called Gary Graham. He's got the Green Infrastructure Consultancy, since the name of his company. He was involved in the strategic planning for the whole Olympic site, and he really knows his stuff, and he's really at any moment now I'll have a report where it sets out the arguments for why there is a net gain on this site, and that's largely to the quality. We might have to offset a little bit, but we're working with LDC to do that, literally adjacent to the site, so we're not going to offset Norfolk or something.
Links to that. Because you have got a positive net gain on that, for example, if the Olympic pumping station, if you have a slight bit, would you be able to go like, well, we did it with this project, so they should almost a sort of a debit or credit sort of thing, or does that
But not
work?
Not it won't maybe at a bigger scale, I don't know. But I think certainly the projects we've experienced, it's specific to that project and that site.
Another question. I'm quite interested in the sort of architectural language that you've developed, particularly around meanwhile use, which there is, there are a set of signifiers of meanwhile use, certain materials, certain ways of using materials, certain kind of what we might, I guess, found objects, found structures. I mean, shipping containers are one thing, but there's others. Yeah, absolutely. And that language, it sort of developed, I guess, from those sorts of practices, kind of in that kind of DIY movement from sort of 2008, those sorts of years. We sort of know, people like Assemble, Office S&M. There's a kind of non-practice architecture. Those kinds of people. But what struck me about what you've done is you've sort of avoided that. There's very little in either of those first two projects that you focused on that really suggests that. And I'm sort of interested in whether that was very much a conscious thing to avoid some of those tropes, and then how you, I guess that's one part of the question, and then how you've kind of gone about doing that, how you've actually managed to to avoid them.
I think it is something we're aware of. I think with Peveril, we're working almost entirely with an existing structure. So Peveril is I think, genuinely a project of creative demolition or constructive demolition. We were making holes in that existing structure, and then putting a few things back. But I think we're putting, things like the screen, these timber screens that form windows and doors are made of kind of very, very readily available hardwoods that an awful lot of windows are made of. So it's the kind of timber that window makers have in huge supply within their workshops, but rather than paint it, we order it as that kind of natural material kind of quality to it. With the case of Hollywood Street, I've never seen actually the other competition entries, but I understand that the other competition entries with the meanwhile use, and it was a street, and there was talk in the brief about kind of bringing festivity and life to the street, that there was quite a lot of that type of architecture, and we did consciously want to avoid it because I think I was saying we wanted, even though it had a 15-year lifespan, we wanted to bring something that had a kind of gravitas, that had a feeling of, it felt like a piece of public architecture. Not to say that I think Practice and Assemble, they're amazing architects, and they do that. I think they self-build and make architecture that has real presence. But we kind of quite early on formulated the idea of trying to use the precast concrete drainage rings, and then the idea that if we stacked them, we could create kind of structural columns with real weight, which is hard to do even in bigger buildings. To actually kind of make stuff with kind of mass and presence like that. And it became an interesting kind of strategy that we explored in that particular project. But I think, I guess like a lot of young architects, we're making these kind of small projects with big ideas, and we love architecture, and we wanted it to look and feel public, and can't think what the particular kind of draw-like references were when we were designing that, but I'm sure we were probably looking at kind of things in Florence, kind of bits of Alberti and stuff. It was yeah, it wouldn't surprise me. You know, bits of stone that you know really well. I mean, we were kind of mixing those kind of architectural references with a way of making that was going to be affordable to the brief.
That's really interesting. You're talking about how you love architecture, because a lot of the debate around how built environment decarbonises, reaches net zero, comes from a perspective of actually disliking architecture,
Yeah.
hating architecture, actually saying no more new builds,
Yeah.
only reuse, which is fine, but as a narrative, to try to sell that to people who are going to live, work, use these buildings, it's not a great, you know, it's not a great thing to be selling. But what I think what you've shown is that actually there's a way of using that situation, which requires urgent and, you know, far-reaching attention, but to do something that is positive and generative, that makes new, interesting, delightful architecture out of these ostensible constraints.
Yeah.
So it's really, really kind of.
I think it has to
struck
be.
with that.
I think it has to be part of the same conversation. Yeah. You know, I think it's our view anyway. That, you know, we still kind of believe in the city, believe in, you know, its ability to kind of keep improving, but do that through, in some ways, through strategies for degrowth. I mean, that, and yeah, it's an interesting moment. But I think I remember being taught about passive projects in 2006, 2007, 2008, where, you know, these projects that were exemplar in terms of their environmental credentials. I mean, passive houses are, you know, it's an interesting example. I think generally, not excuse me, because there are some really beautiful passive houses out there, but those projects were, the stats on the projects was unquestionable. You know, they built very low carbon, they had very low operational carbon, etc. But there was nothing, you know, they weren't houses that we would dream of, or of occupying, or office spaces that we would want to go and work in. And I think that's what we have to, you know, you have to do. It has to also be architecture that is delightful, and cities that are full of wonder, like they can't otherwise. I guess that's there, isn't it? That's a human instinct. Otherwise, I think people will just keep going for the. I mean, let's see, as it gets more stringently regulated, that they will go for the cheaper, kind of dirtier solution. You know, virtual reality. I mean, who knows? You know, like, it's sort of like,
with, like, especially in London, there are so many buildings being built and demolished, like, all the time everywhere.
you know.
Do you find it would be easier if there was more of a infrastructure network, sort of like using waste materials, deconstructed materials, like there is sort of with like Super E Studio in the Netherlands and also at Brito in like Belgium?
Yeah, I mean, it's.
Is it easier with like the
It's
council?
it's slowly happening, but you're right. I mean, there are great examples of very well organised kind of networks that don't think exist. I'm not aware of them existing or equivalents existing in the UK, but it is happening. So I know some councils now have sites where building material goes that it then sort of itemised and stored in a way that it can make sure that it can be reused, and more retrofits and buildings being built right now have to have this kind of passport or this sort of digital twin, and you have to think about planning. that's all relatively recent. So it's playing out, and I think it will improve a lot over the next decade or so. You know, I think it's going to happen. It's happening. I think it will happen more and more quickly. But you're right. Like we're behind in terms of networks for reuse of building materials that do exist. Like you say, I think in Belgium, Holland in particular, I'm sure in Germany as well. And I think France has also got an amazing culture around that. Yeah.
Thank you for your questions. Final question, because we've got to draw things to a close, we've got to the end. You mentioned at some point during the lecture that obviously you enjoy these smaller projects, but aspirations for bigger things. And firstly, I'm kind of interested in what they are. So a slightly kind of silly question in a sense. But I'm also interested in the kind of the scalability of the methodology and the philosophy that lies behind it. How do you have a sense of how scalable it is? What adaptations you might need to make to work at different scales, from the kind of the sort of micro sites through to applying it